Good morning. So I'm going to get the party started by talking about something really exciting, security awareness. But really I'm going to be exploring why that probably makes you sigh and yawn a little. This statistic has been true for far too long now, and it's worth pausing on and thinking that technical controls can never be 100%, and yet 83% of attacks are starting with the human user. Something's not really working. But hey, we've got security awareness training, haven't we? Problem solved. Well, even the National Cybersecurity Centre have expressed some caution here. So they recently set a challenge for startups, declaring that traditional ways of tackling this problem really weren't driving behaviour change and actually reducing risk. The ISF also did some work suggesting that only 15% of people actually changed their behaviours from doing traditional awareness training. And of course, phishing simulations, which is a very common approach to try and tackle this problem, do tend to leave people feeling tricked and embarrassed. And again, the National Cybersecurity Centre has expressed a bit of caution about how you use these. So stepping back from that a little bit, what are we even measuring and how do we tell that this is doing anything? Well, with traditional approaches, all you're really measuring is, have people done it? Maybe how have they answered some questions that they probably could have Googled? And maybe what's their click rate on a phishing simulation? Well, if you've ever got involved in those, you know that you can get the click rate you kind of want by designing the test the way you want to design the test. So what I want to explore today is 5 common mistakes I think people are making in the way that they tackle security awareness, and dig into that a little bit to draw out some of the behavioural science and the psychology behind that, and explore what we could be doing in a different way. So the first one to start with, it's just common sense. So I suppose the idea here is that, well, acting securely, not clicking on things, is obvious, isn't it? Now, that's really easy for us perhaps as practitioners to say, and this comes down to the fact that well, I should be aiming this to make it work, there you go. We have mental models in our heads because we've worked in the cyber industry for a while, so we kind of get it makes sense to us. What we've got to realise is those models might not be shared by the people that we're working with. And there's 2 sort of psychological problems here. One is this idea of the curse of knowledge, that someone who understands things actually finds it quite hard to understand that other people can't understand things, and to explain those things in a way that will make sense to them. And then on the other side of the equation, you have the issue that someone who's perhaps not that good at something tends to have an overinflated idea of how good they are at it. Like, I think most people here would say that they are an above average driver, but that's not how averages work. So Dunning-Kruger sort of suggests that people might think they're better at these things. So you've got these 2 sides of it. We can't explain it very well, and people think they know it anyway, so they don't need to listen. This, it's common sense, could also be senior managers saying to security professionals, well, look, changing people's behaviours, getting them to act securely, it's really simple. Come on, just get on with it. Where do you start with that one? Changing people's behaviours is really, really tricky. Behaviours are really this collection of habit, of context, which could be physical, social, all sorts of reflective thinking about how you behave, but also automatic behaviours that you just do without really thinking. So behaviour is much more complicated. And that's not a counsel of despair, it's just making the point that changing behaviours and getting people to act securely is not going to be easy. The next one we have here is this idea that, well, it's just about knowledge and understanding. And of course, that's got to be a starting point. We do need to make sure we impart some knowledge and help people understand what do the threats look like, what could they do about it. But we have, in many organisations, been doing mandatory security awareness training for more than 10 years now. And people are still having these problems, people are still falling for cyber attacks. Awareness does not necessarily equal understanding, and it definitely doesn't necessarily mean behaviour change and reduce risk. And it's true to say that even experts fall for phishing. So Ian Levy admits that he wasn't taken all the way by a social engineer, but he got caught out initially. So even experts will fall for these things. And so it's not necessarily about making everyone in your organisation an expert. It might not be about knowledge. A base level, yes, but that's not the whole solution. And behaviour can be really nuanced. So I might do something insecure completely deliberately because it's the only way to get my job done, and I've got to meet something that my boss has asked me to do. Or it might be a mistake. It's not necessarily a deliberate act. So it's not necessarily about knowledge and understanding. This one I particularly like. It's almost like saying perhaps we should be shouting a bit louder or speaking a bit more slowly because people aren't getting the message across. Now, I do think we could do much better here, much better than things like e-learning. if you reflect on e-learning, it's a great tool when we choose to learn, when you want to go and learn something, you do a course, an online course, you watch videos. We're in a situation where we're kind of trying to make people learn, and they've got a lot of other stuff in their work that they might need to learn about, and you're trying to force them to also learn about cybersecurity. Now, we can make this better, and there's better content out there, videos, escape rooms, and things like this. But I think we need to sort of think a bit harder here about whether these tools are really solving the problem, because they're not necessarily taking into account things like spacing and the learning science behind how we actually think, learn, and behave. So for example, if you're revising for an exam, you do a little bit of this, then you pause, you come back to it, you're spreading that learning over time. Whereas traditional approaches tend to be, let's do it all up front and hope people remember 6 months later. But also they're forgetting about context. And I'll come on to this in a second, but most awareness is not particularly timely. It's not in the context where the threat lies, and that's where behaviours happen and where we really need to be talking and helping people. So let's put that into an example. So here we've got Kate doing her security awareness training. She looks pretty damn bored. She's now starting to forget. So this is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and it's this idea that after 5 days you probably only remember about 20% of what you've been taught. Maybe she goes on holiday, she comes back, she's got loads of work to do, maybe on a particular day she's a bit distracted, and then her client asks her to upload a file to a certain website. Your traditional approach is relying on her remembering what she was taught maybe 3-6 months ago, and hoping that in this point in time when she's asked to do something, she remembers what to do securely. And so reflecting on that, you can think, well, how likely is it that she's going to remember what to do? And this comes into behaviours and how we actually behave at a point in time in a moment when we're trying to make a decision based on risk. And it would be nice to assume that we are all rational beings. If you explain to us how we should behave and how we should protect ourselves, then we'll be working hard to minimise risks and maximise gains. But that's a traditional way of thinking about behaviour, and social economists and people like Thaler and Sunstein, with their book Nudge, have highlighted that actually we don't really work like this. There's a lot of things that drive the way we behave. This traditional approach is called economic utility theory. But actually, Kahneman and Tversky suggested that there's two modes of operation of our brains. So sometimes we make these really deliberate decisions, maybe about 5% of the decisions we make each day, whereas 95% of the time we're acting on heuristics, rules of thumb, we're taking shortcuts, and that's deliberate because our brain simply can't cope with all the information it's being exposed to. And these shortcuts are massively driven and influenced by the context that we're in and the cues we get from our environment. And so let's pick out a couple of things and a couple of sort of cognitive biases that lead the way that we make decisions. So there's this idea of anchoring, that when we're trying to make a decision, we're looking for something to anchor that off when we first make the decision. Now, that tends to mean that we remember and we focus on the first thing we learned. That's difficult in a cybersecurity world where things are evolving. So we told people it's passwords. Length doesn't matter, maybe 8 characters, but make it really mixed up, strong passwords, exclamation marks, numbers and stuff. We've changed our minds now. We actually think a longer password that's a bit simpler to remember, 3 random words, would be much better. But people have got stuck. They've anchored, they've been told that one thing, and then confirmation bias comes in. If you already know something, you tend to be kind of looking for information that backs up that and ignore information that challenges it. So it's quite hard to teach people when they've already anchored and they're stuck with this old way of thinking. Social proof is a really strong driver. It can be really helpful to awareness practitioners if you can use examples of where other people are acting in a secure way, but it can also work against us. If you've got people in a department where perhaps the boss isn't perhaps acting as securely, or they are prioritising delivery over security, then that is the way that people will start to act. Those will become the social norms in that part of the organisation. Optimism bias can be a real challenge. We all think that bad things won't happen to us, and so you will find a lot of people in your organisations who think, well, no one's going to try and phish me. That's like, why would they bother? And obviously we understand that they might not even be trying to target you. It could be collateral damage. Emotion is really important, and in that example I gave of someone doing their awareness, if a client is asking you to do something, that's quite emotionally charged, and you will tend to want to follow through and do what you've been asked to do. Availability, again, we're always looking for this anchoring point. If we've read about something in the news, then we're more likely to think it happens. It's why people tend to think that plane crashes are more dangerous, but actually getting in your car every day is far more dangerous. So if people have heard about topics about security, when you're then trying to explain something to them, they're more likely to have that available and they're more likely to remember it. So we can use that as well. These are I'm just scratching the surface of some of the examples of cognitive biases that influence how we make decisions. We don't always act rationally, and the bad guys use this against us all the time. You see it in phishing lures, playing to social proof, authority, that make us click. Having said that, I'm going to completely contradict myself and say that another mistake is thinking that people always act irrationally. They won't always, and as I said earlier, sometimes people make completely rational decisions and act insecurely because it's the only way of getting the job done. And the solution here, I suppose, is you've got to dig into the context. You've got to use data to understand what's actually going on, why are those behaviours happening, and try and understand which parts of the organisation perhaps you're seeing those behaviours in. And it could well be a business process change that the security team needs to try and influence if they can. So those are sort of exploring some of the things, some of the problems we've got when we try and tackle security awareness. I'll just check I'm not going to get a red flag. So stepping back, what are we trying to achieve? Is it compliance, expertise? It should be behaviour change. If we're going to reduce risk, we need to change people's behaviours. So ideally what we want to do is quantify risk, target behaviours, and measure the impact that we're having. So let's touch on two models side by side just to explore how we might change behaviour to do that. The first one, BJ Fogg, he says that for any behaviour, there's got to be motivation, there's got to be ability, but there's also got to be some sort of timely prompt, something that triggers you into acting. And the nudge unit have a similar model. They say if you want to nudge someone to act, the behaviour has to be easy, attractive, you've got to want to do it, socially kind of acceptable, but also timely. So this timeliness is absolutely fundamental in how we get people to actually change their behaviour. So pulling that together, every behaviour takes place in a context. There'll be some sort of trigger and and that will lead to an action. Our traditional approaches have been in the wrong place. They're over here. They're infrequent, they're very quickly forgotten, and they're really not going to change behaviour. And then there's some things that we see over here. So phishing simulations kind of work like this. They're happening after the fact. You risk getting into this cycle where you're punishing people with training. The same is true if you're picking up events on the scene. So you're seeing what security events have happened. That's useful to know about behaviours. But you end up then sending people punishing sort of nags to say, don't do that. The sweet spots that we found from our research, working with Cardiff University, is either priming people just before the behaviour happens. So intervening to steer people away from it or just to subconsciously help them understand this is a thing. Or even intervening as they're about to do it. They're about to click a link, they're about to upload a file, they've clicked a link and they're about to enter their credentials. And if you intervene here, you can measure what people are doing, how often those behaviours are happening, and then you can intervene and steer them away from that. I think I've slightly mistimed my talk, so I haven't got time to show you what that looks like, and I will stop there. But if you've got any questions, we've got a stand out there, lots of blogs that explain this and the psychology behind it more. But my parting message would be, we need to be thinking about how we deliver and steer and guide people in the context where the threat lies in real time. Thank you very much.